Hi, I'm Regina Celestin Williams, the Executive Director of SV at Home. Policy in Action at Home is a monthly informal discussion convening housers to engage on hot housing topics. Every month, we select a topic or current event, bring in experts to give a brief presentation, and then open up the discussion to ask questions, float new ideas, and identify potential areas for shared action. For this special Affordable Housing Month edition of the PIA, we're dedicating an hour and a half to focus on racial and economic equity in ADU construction. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, unceded territories of the Ohlone Muwekma, Ramaytush Ohlone, Tamiya Nation, and the Ama Mutsun, on which we are learning, working, and organizing today. We are committed to honoring and making visible the Indigenous people in the nations that that were intentionally displaced from their land, who remain here in Silicon Valley and are a part of our community. I would also like to acknowledge that today is Malcolm X Day. He was an African-American Muslim minister and a civil rights leader who was a pivotal voice for Black empowerment in the 1960s. Although highly skeptical of the law itself, he had a significant impact on expanding the Civil Rights Acts of the 1960s. These are the laws that have empowered us to do the racial equity work we're doing today to affirmatively further fair housing in our communities. Malcolm X was bold, compelling, and focused on addressing the root of the problem, all traits that we hope to continue to use in our fight for housing justice. Happy Malcolm X Day, everyone. Now I'm going to hand it over to Allison Singalani, our Policy and Research Senior Associate, who will be moderating the discussion today. Allison?
Thank you so much, Regina, and thank you all for joining us. I'm really excited for a great discussion today. Before we get going, I just want to cover a couple of ground rules and kind of code of conduct for us for our conversation. We do want to ensure that the conversations and relationships here today remain respectful and productive. So please be kind and courteous to each other, no rude comments or personal attacks. We do encourage asking questions and listening as we learn and engage with each other. Please keep comments and questions focused on our topics today. We do really welcome your questions. So as we go through the presentations, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We'll collect those. There will be some time to hear from our speakers and ask some questions near the end of the discussion today. Sometimes the chat can get lively. So if you find it's distracting you from the content of the discussion, we do encourage you to consider closing the chat temporarily. All right, so I'm so excited to introduce our two guests today, who both bring a tremendous amount of expertise and experience in the field. Mohammed T. Alameldin is the Policy Associate for the Terner Center, where he recently co-authored a report titled ADUs for All, Breaking Down Barriers to Racial and Economic Equity in Accessory Dwelling Unit Construction. He brings the center's innovative research to inform housing policy at the local, state, and federal levels. Before he joined the Terner Center, Mohammed was an Economic Equity Fellow for the Greenlining Institute, which is a public policy research and advocacy social justice organization. He led the economic equity team's state legislative efforts in mortgage interest deduction reform and supporting equitable housing policies, and co-authored a fair financial system regulating fintech and non-bank lenders. He's now a board member of that organization. Prior to his work at Greenlining, Mohammed communicated housing policy ideas to the public at California YIMBY and successfully helped lobby Congress to start paying their legislative interns at Pay Our Interns. Mohammed is a former Cal Bear and has written for and been cited in a variety of publications, from Cal Matters to The Atlantic. Ileana Nichols is also joining us as a speaker today. She leads the Can Do ADU program at East Palo Alto Community Alliance and Neighborhood Development Organization, or EPA Can Do. The ADU program is centered on providing East Palo Alto homeowners with hands-on support for planning, building, and renting their own accessory dwelling unit. The program has assisted more than 85 households since its inception in 2021. Ileana earned her master's degree in urban and regional planning from San Jose State University, go Spartans, and previously worked in environmental justice around climate resilience and adaptation planning. In her free time, she's a member of the East Palo Alto Planning Commission and the East Palo Alto Climate Change Community Team. She also volunteers for summers to the Chicano Latino Youth Leadership Project, empowering youth to pursue higher education, engage in civic participation, and become agents of social change. So really, really fun discussion today. I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to ask Mohammed to share the results of his research, and then Ileana will share her kind of on-the-ground experiences helping homeowners navigate what is often a complex and challenging process to developing an ADU. We'll open it up to some moderated Q&A after that. So as I mentioned before, if you have questions as we go, please be sure to drop them in the chat. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Mohammed.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mohammed Alameldin. I'll be presenting for you all today for affordable housing. I believe the slides will be shared shortly. Perfect. Yeah, definitely. So I will be discussing 3 papers that were written at the Terner Center on how accessory dwelling units are entering the market. First, we have to do an overview of how people finance ADUs in general to really understand breaking down their barriers for communities of color. Slide. So we conducted this research in collaboration with the USC Center and Center for Community Innovation, one's at USC, one's at UC Berkeley. And we asked homeowners what were the biggest challenges when it came to building their accessory dwelling unit. This research was done around 2018, 2019, before a lot of the changes to ADU laws happened in the state of California, which really streamlined the process, with a permit shot clock to be known about whether something is approved within 60 days, the elimination of impact fees under 750 square feet, and objective design standards being established. HCD's guidelines have been very helpful in that manner. But within this research, we found that paying for the cost of construction of an ADU at that time was the 3rd most spoken challenge for respondents. Next slide. And let me fix my audio just because it's a little choppy right now. Do I sound better now? Okay. All right, awesome. So this project background was that we were looking for ways in which we could help homeowners add housing supply and how ADU financing impacts BIPOC homeowners. The goals were to identify the universe of financing options for ADUs, identify the barriers within government-backed loans that limit the construction of ADUs, and develop policy recommendations. We conducted a literature review, one-on-one interviews, and roundtable discussions with people all across the state. Next slide. So how have people been financing ADU construction? Most people are putting some money down when it comes to building ADUs. They're putting down some cash. HELOCs are the most used mortgage product for ADU construction, but that's not the case in the overall market. It's really like 6% of the mortgage market in 2020. And renovation loans are seldom used, and that's due to limitations to the 203K financing program by the FHA. So we really wanted to focus on, when speaking with people that we have surveyed, there's been a lot of discussion about 203K loans and how that's sort of the best way for us to finance ADU construction, and reforms in that space would be the most conclusive to help people pay for ADUs. So this data reflects that point of time of how people would finance ADU construction. Next slide. So the 203K program, which is the home renovation program, has had some issues and why it's not being used, and that was the primary focus of this paper. Rental income at the time was not for consideration. The eligibility was very tight, and there wasn't enough appraisal information because ADUs are very new to the space. The FHA responded to this paper recently by having more leniency within its program, saying that ADU construction, it's still solidifying everything within the process right now and updating the law. But ADU construction can take in 50% of the proposed rental income when it comes to financing an ADU, which is a huge change within the program. And that renovation loans can primarily be used for ADUs that are attached to the dwelling unit. There has been some criticisms about these changes, and HUD has been very receptive to those criticisms, mainly that most ADUs are detached. So the 203K program should be expanded to detached ADUs. And practitioners consistently have noted with these changes that happened just last month that 50% of rental income is a great first step. But for duplexes, it's currently allowed up to 75% of future income. And that's important because for the loan to be approved, the higher the income that the ADU can bring in, more likely that it can be financed through the 203K program. Similarly, there have been discussions of which how we could expand it for multiple ADUs within one property, because in California, it is legal to have a junior accessory dwelling unit, which is typically attached to the home and under 500 square feet, and a detached ADU in the back. Next slide. So our recommendations were really to modify the guidelines, which is currently in process. We do propose allowing more ADU units to be factored in and built. And we recommend specific ADU training for appraisers. Appraisals right now are appraising ADUs for 1/3 of the cost it takes to build them, even though their value to homeowners and the income that they can bring in is a lot more than that. And also to clarify how ADU income goes into the appraised value, which I discussed. And we need to see how often ADU loans are being denied within the space. This paper was done before interest rates have gone up to 6%. It was during a time when it was about 2%. So we're expected to see a decrease in ADU construction across the state, which is unfortunate because 1/5 of all new homes being built in the Los Angeles area are accessory dwelling units. People are going to refinance if interest rates are higher than the mortgage that they currently have, which is a main source of funding. Next slide. So after this paper, we conducted one on how BIPOC homeowners, really ash poor, home rich people and communities of color are able to build ADUs. A lot of ADUs are being built in more wealthy, exclusionary areas, which is a good step by unleashing these high opportunity areas for people to live in. But at the same time, as a wealth building mechanism, communities of color homeowners need to have the option to build the ADUs within their homes. Next slide. So this research was based on the earlier paper, of which we have seen that they're being built in wider, more wealthy areas. And we're seeing this primarily in the coastal cities, LA, San Francisco, and San Diego. And the higher the income and the more likely area is wider or historically exclusionary, the more likely an ADU could be financed, because they can do an all cash build or mostly all cash build, or to refinance is much easier for homes in that area. Next slide. So we worked with nonprofit housing consultants or people that build accessory dwelling units for communities of color up and down the state. We have interviewed BIPOC homeowners that were thinking about building an ADU, in the process of building an ADU, or have built an ADU, and what are the biggest barriers to that construction. ADU Can Do, who's speaking after me, was one of the people that we spoke with in these interviews, right? We talked to people within the front lines to figure out what are the barriers. And unlike the previous report, the number one barrier for community for people of color is the lack of financing option. They don't have as much cash on hand, or really understand the governmental process when it comes to permits, surveying, and just the difficulty of having capital. And in some cases, in the middle of the project of when it's being built, they would run out of money because of unexpected costs during construction. So we spoke to a few homeowners where they have most of an ADU built, but they just don't have that last bit of capital to finalize it. Next slide. So we created these recommendations based on this research. Our survey of homeowners really, our interviews with homeowners really explicitly state that like these community organizations have been very helpful in providing assistance in building ADUs. There needs to be more tailored financing options for homeownership counseling to BIPOC and low to moderate income households. Streamlining the ADU permitting and approval process is a great way to reduce the complexity of homeowners. San Jose does this great with their pre-approved designs for ADUs and with ADU Tuesday by approving permits. It's actually the best system we've seen in the field where homeowners know if something will be approved within a week or even a few hours. If you submitted the application on a Monday, you find out on Tuesday. And very importantly, ADUs have been a part of communities of color for a long time. It was usually making space for grandma. It was usually like a conversion of the garage. But ADUs were illegal for a long time because of exclusionary zoning. Single family only home zoning was meant to exclude communities of color who usually have intergenerational housing. So creating a clear pathway for unpermitted ADUs, like an amnesty program, where if the homeowner brings it up to health and fire safety regulations, that ADU is permitted, is a great first step for communities of color to get involved in legalizing their ADUs, making sure everything's up to code, and they could later rent it out. So in my experiences, Santa Maria and the Central Coast has one of the highest ADU construction per capita. I think second to just Los Angeles. And most of these homes are owned by farm workers in the area, and their land values have increased. And they're able to convert their garages and rent it out to people making about 50 to 80% AMI. And they're able to retire because they were excluded from basically the retirement system for so long. So like ADUs are a great wealth building tool. They're a great way to keep families together, right? With childcare being so expensive, it's great to have an elderly person on the property to take care of children. And they're a great way to keep families together. And a big part of displacement that's going on in California due to high rents are making families split to other states, and that has its toll on communities. Next slide. Finally, I'll be discussing San Diego's ADU bonus program. Next slide. Let me go to the next slide. I accidentally put them out of order. I'm going to go back to the slide after this. Yeah, perfect. So the city of San Diego leaned into ADU laws and really made it a way, the accessory dwelling bonus program, to achieve their goals for low to moderate income residents. There was a bill by Assemblymember Friedman in 2019, AB 671, which mandated local governments to build accessory dwelling units, to have plans to build accessory dwelling units for low to moderate income households. The key purpose of this program, or the way that they created it, was that in transit priority areas, homeowners or developers could build an unlimited amount of ADUs, but outside of transit priority areas, they have the option to build 2 additional ADUs per lot. After state law, after the 180 detached ADU that's built in the back, and if they want to build more on top of that, for every market rate ADU that's built, one ADU that is deed restricted affordable for 10 to 15 years has to be affordable to people that are low to moderate income. Now we can go back a slide. It'll start making sense now. So the guidelines were that if you were going to build for a moderate income, it's a 15-year timeline of which it's deed restricted. If it's low income, it's 10 years where it's deed restricted. These affordable ADUs shall be, which is very important legal language, shall be comparable in size, bedroom mix, amenities, and features to the market rate ADUs. The city placed itself on the title in the second lien position when it comes to single family home zone areas, and in the first position in multifamily zone areas. You may think, wow, unlimited ADUs in a transit priority area. What does that mean? That means that a place that San Diego has frequent transit or plans to have frequent transit in the near future can build as much ADUs as allowed through the zoning of single family or multifamily within that area. So existing land use regulations like floor area ratio, lot coverage, and height requirements influence how many additional units can be built. Next slide again. So this program has been very successful. There's about 300 ADUs in the process of being built right now that are deed restricted to low to moderate income without any public subsidy. The theory behind this is that by having a rolling cycle of more ADUs being built, people have more housing options to live in, and that by the 10 to 15 year deed restrictions, people in the private market can actually finance these ADUs and they're not reliant on public subsidies. As you can see in the graph to your left, what was allowed by state law is about 147 units. 253 units, bonus units, are market rate, and 295 are deed restricted, which means that in some places they're just building the affordable housing unit. The ADUs are naturally more affordable across the state, conducted by a survey that we did a few years ago, to people making about 80% AMI, which is a great way of saying like teachers or school employees, nurses, these sort of folks. But in our survey, we found that Orange County and San Diego was not affordable. Well, it's not affordable. We just didn't have enough data to find if it was affordable to that area median income for those groups. And San Diego took it upon itself through this new law that was passed to ensure that there would be housing affordability with new ADUs being built, because they have some of the highest rising land values in the state, which sometimes makes it unaffordable. Next slide. The program works because they leaned into state laws, which had by right ministerial approval for extra units, no impact fees under a certain square footage, 60 days, the permits are approved, the maximum amount of units are being built on a given lot. They're actually stacking these ADUs on top of each other. And when it comes to the deed restriction, it's administered through the San Diego Housing Commission, which is like part of a government body, but not really. For $150 a year, they do it for the developer or the homeowner that owns these units. And because of the lien positioning that the city has placed itself, banks are able to build these ADUs with commercial loans. And they could also bring in the income that the main home has as a way to finance the ADUs in the back, which makes it a lot easier for homeowners or for small developers to utilize this program. I mean, this law has passed, and in the last 18 months, we have 300 more deed restricted units being built, over 550 units total, compared to 147 that would have been allowed by state law. Next slide. So these are some example projects. The project to your right, one of the benefits of the ADU bonus program is that these kind of like fit the neighborhood character if you care about that. and it's 6 units that are 2-bedroom, 2-bath that have been built for about $800,000, which is a very affordable price point. And that means that that lot went from 1 home to 7 homes, and 3 of them are affordable to low to moderate income households. And 2-bedroom, 2-bath is a great typology, and it's near transit. So the parking isn't as necessary, which is great for our environmental goals. The project to our left is one that's currently being built. There was this project that was a World War II triplex that hasn't been that's been vacant for a long time. And the only reason the developer is able to build this project is because they built 9 studios through the ADU bonus program. And through the money through those 9 studios, they're able to renovate the front home. And through this process, we went from 0 units within this lot to about 12. So with about 4 of them being affordable to people making 80 to 120% AMI with no public subsidy. Next slide. So the successes, so we conducted interviews with small developers, with people within San Diego's planning department, and they found that the successes of this program was really just the streamlining of services, right? San Diego has this development services department where if you're a homeowner or a small developer, you get to build, and you want to build something, you're designated a project manager who will go to every agency for you, and you have one point of contact, rather than the homeowner going to 7 different agencies at the city and county level to get things approved. And in collaboration with the building community, they rewrite their annual codes. What we have seen is that now, because of the ADU bonus program, architects, mortgage brokers, people in the building trades, union work, people housing adjacent are becoming small scale developers. They're women and people of color have been entering the space, which is very important because a recent study found that less than 1% of developers are Black or Latinx. There are actually only 2 Latina developers in the state of California. So this program has actually, well, that's why I've heard, I actually don't have a real statistic, but that's why I've been hearing a lot in the development space. I would love to confirm that. The lower cost of, this also brought a lower cost to build missing middle housing, the 6 units for $800,000. And it's easier to finance because you can use prospective rental income, which is what I was discussing in the first slide. The drawbacks, because this is a research paper, is that the city has stated that this might have a strain on infrastructure because there aren't impact fees charged for these developments. These are homeownership units, which is a big critique of ADUs in general. And there needs to be more bigger family-sized units, which makes sense. And this is an issue within urban building right now, that a lot of what can be built is at max 2 bedrooms. And there's a lot of issues within the building code and financing structures, and that needs to be addressed in future legislation to ensure that ADUs could be homeownership units and we could have more family size buildings. Next slide. And I'll pass it on to the facilitator to introduce the next speaker. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mohammed. So now I'm really excited to hear from Ileana as well. So Ileana has been on the front lines implementing and working with a lot of the policies that Mohammed has been talking about in East Palo Alto, helping folks navigate this complex process. So Ileana, if you would like to tell us a little bit about your experiences in helping local homeowners to navigate that.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Allison. And excited to be here. Again, I'm Ileana Nicholas, and I am based in East Palo Alto, working with EPA Can Do. Next slide, please. Just to give you all some context of geographically where we are located in the peninsula in San Mateo County, right by the bay. We're a small little town, and we are zoned for over 50% of for single family housing. And so there are a lot of opportunities to participate in what some people call gentle density, which means densifying parcels to accommodate more than one unit. And so with the state laws that passed back in 2020 and in the years after, has allowed ADUs to be allowed under conditions that were once prohibited. And East Palo Alto was one of those cities, of course, like others in the state, that prohibited ADUs to an extent in which it were created. It was really hard for homeowners to build them. As we all know, ADUs can help with cities' regional housing needs allocation numbers, particularly in being able to meet some of those moderate and above moderate income categories that are generally hard to meet. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background about EPA Can Do. We are a community development corporation, and we started back in the 90s. Really what our mission is to steward responsible community development and achieve a just city that is protected by place security. So where present and future generations are housing stable and economically secure. We have developed about 75% of affordable housing in East Palo Alto with other nonprofit partners through joint ventures. Next slide, please. And I am here today due to the work of a second unit task force that was created here in East Palo Alto after a year back in 2016, where the city enforced building and safety codes that caused many families living in unpermitted units to be displaced after receiving eviction notices due to these code violations. So the community really mobilized and gathered, especially our faith community, to publish a report to provide to the city of ways that the city could actually embark on a long-term solution of addressing second units or unpermitted units in our city. And part of that meant advocating for an amnesty program, education programs for landlords and tenants of these units. And so out of the work that the faith community did on the ground came a second unit task force that was actually created by our city council to really look into how can we address this issue and what policies can be proposed and what solutions can we take on to really address this need in our community. So the second unit task force was created, and it concluded around 2019, next slide, after doing a couple of pilot projects where they actually took on some code enforcement cases that were largely around garage conversions. And they went ahead and fixed them up with a lot of nonprofit support from Rebuilding Together, Peninsula, the County of San Mateo, and other organizations and jurisdictions. So they embarked on about this 3-4 year journey of really working to see what can the city do in order to make second units possible and helping those that have existing second units that were unpermitted. And so when the task force concluded around 2019, they set a report with a bunch of recommendations and strategies in order to support this work. And the photos you see here on this slide are just an example of 2 projects that were worked on here in our community. Although the second unit task force has concluded, a lot of the work is still ongoing. We still meet sort of like as an informal group, but also a group that still works very close to the city, with the city, in order to really set forth those strategies that were outlined in this report that the organizations that worked on it initially published. And a lot of our work really spring forward when the state laws were updated back in 2020. Next slide. And just to give you all a little preview of what those strategies were, there were about 10 different strategies that were very key and that the group had identified as as areas in which the city and nonprofits could focus on in order to make second units possible in the city and support those tenants and homeowners who lived in unpermitted second units as well. Next slide, please. And so today, what I'll just touch on is our one of the key strategies outlined, which was creating a support system, which I pretty much am part of, where there is sort of like a case manager or an ally or an advocate at a nonprofit like EPA can do that supports tenants and homeowners through the process of building second units, and as well as clearing court enforcement cases because of unpermitted second units. Next slide, please. And additionally, sorry. Yes, sorry. And additionally, I'll also talk about the financial resources that as a group we have discussed and that we're also working on collectively, and as well as where the city of East Palo Alto also is supporting this work. Next slide. As it has been echoed in this presentation before, I am part of the Can Do ADU program here at EPA Can Do. I primarily lead this program, and it's essentially what this program does is really walks homeowners of East Palo Alto through all the phases of ADU development. And those phases are from lot assessment, figuring out what's actually physically possible on the lot, what kind of ADUs they can actually build on their property, depending on how their property conforms to the development code and so on. Financing, which means figuring out how homeowners will pay for this project, what gaps need to be addressed in financing. Plans and permits, which is helping them secure plans and permits to actually build, then followed by construction management, actually getting the unit built and making sure it goes according to schedule, no project overruns and so on. And then lastly, leasing the units. So a lot of our homeowners, they don't consider themselves developers. They don't really necessarily consider themselves landlords until they're already into the process. So what we do is each step of the way is that we help shepherd them and steward them into essentially being small site developers and also landlords. And this process may seem really linear in a very pragmatic way, but it's actually not super linear. A lot of our homeowners actually come into our program at different stages of the process. I've had homeowners who have worked with me from start to finish, that I walk with them through assessing what's possible on their lots, all the way to helping them actually find a tenant for their unit. But in some cases, other homeowners, especially homeowners that live in communities like East Palo Alto, where they might be able to navigate the systems themselves. There may be language barriers. They just may not be able to really find the adequate resources to make their projects happen. Some people come to me and when they're trying to figure out how to finance their projects. Some people get hire designers that just totally, do not respond to them anymore. So they're trying to figure out where can they pick up the pieces. I've had homeowners have plans already and they just need help finding a contractor. I've had also homeowners come to me during the construction process saying that their contractor didn't work out with them anymore. So there's different stages in which my homeowners usually come to me, and what I'm here to do is to be a resource to them and help them, overcome these barriers or overcome these bottlenecks. Next slide, please. So additionally, our support approach is what I called it's mirrored after the sustainability three-legged stool, and I call it the three-legged readiness stool when it comes to building accessory dwelling units and how to support the homeowners like the ones in East Palo Alto that I work with. So usually it's 3 prongs: being physical, life, and financial. And you need to be able to have a good foundation for those 3 areas in order to achieve readiness for an ADU project. So we'll start with the physical. So most times what we look to support our residents through, again, is figuring out what's actually physically possible on their properties. What can they actually build, right? And then what are the existing uses of that space? How do they envision to use the space in the long term? What's already there? Do they value like family gatherings, but they might have to take up their backyard in order to build up an ADU? So really thinking about physically, what can we work here? How can the physically, how can your property physically help you achieve a quality of life, long-term sustainability, and so on? And then we also talk about, we address the life part of it, because life happens. You know, a lot of people start their project and then they decide that there's a barrier that they can't overcome. That's not necessarily money. It's not necessarily physically not being able to comply with the development code. So what we talk about is like, what is your motivation for starting a project? Some people want to start a project because they want to age in place. They may have an elderly elderly like parent or family member that they like to house. Some people want to do it because of rental income. They want to increase their income. They see a way of using this unused space on their property to increase their income. Other people do it because they have a code violation and they want to get that over with. The other factor that I'm commonly seeing a lot, and I think is very common in communities of color, is that a lot of our households are multi-generational. And so when you have a lot of different generations and a lot of people that make up a household, it's often difficult to get everyone on the same boat in terms of making a decision on how they envision this project to go, what they envision this project to be, and figuring out how to make this happen. And then lastly, the financials of the project. Communities of color like East Palo Alto and across the state and almost anywhere, because of rising land values, there's a lot of equity on the properties, but there's often a barrier to accessing that equity. And that can be due to debt to income ratios, like having a lot more debt than what your income can support. Sometimes it's just like you are not able to have the income to cover an increased mortgage if you do a refinance or you do a home equity line of credit. And in many cases as well, because we work with multi-generational households, a lot of our household members share their debts. They share debts and liabilities, and for many reasons to support other family members. Sometimes we work with households that are mixed status immigrant families. So someone usually takes the burden of debt or the burden of liabilities. So working through all these three different phases is actually very crucial in order for a homeowner to be ready for to go on and to build this accessory dwelling unit. So part of our support approach is very hands-on, very on the ground, very case manager, social worker, type of approach to helping homeowners in East Palo Alto. And that is because there's that need in our communities to really have an organization or a person that can really help navigate through these systems that are sometimes be foreign. Next slide, please. So I've had, over the course of the last 2 years, we launched in 2021, and we've had a couple successful projects with homeowners who have walked through the entire process from start to finish. These are example of 2 homeowners who qualify for conventional financing, were able to have the funding, the time, and the resources to embark on this project. But this is just a small segment of our households makeup. In terms of like in the community, this is just a small segment of those that I can actually do a project like this. But I really wanted to just showcase that although there are barriers that exist, that we are able to help our homeowners overcome these barriers and really help them achieve a project like this. Next slide. But we always knew that that this type or this example of a household was not going to be the norm, was not going to be what we always found when we did our client work. Unfortunately, we did always know that cost would be one of the biggest barriers to ADU production in East Palo Alto, and as well as a barrier to the homeowners that we work with on a day-to-day basis. As you can see here, the cost for the ADUs are quite high. These are all stick-built from the ground up. They're not manufactured or prefab or modular, but costs like $300,000 or $230,000 just for a simple 1-bedroom, 1-bath are pretty high. So you can only imagine working with lower income households that may not always have those means to be able to embark on a project like this. So as we were creating the program early on in the early years, and a lot of the ADU laws were coming through, and a lot of startup companies were coming up as to like showcasing their product in order to help increase ADU productions. We started thinking about like, what else can we do as an organization to support our homeowners? And so we've come up with 3 different financing solutions that we think could be very helpful in our community as well in other communities. Next slide. And one of those, sorry, I'm not seeing the slide change, but one of those things that that we are seeing as a solution to addressing financial barriers to our homeowners is something like a community revolving loan fund. As I mentioned before, sometimes ADU financing can be unattainable to our low-income homeowners. And so even though they have a lot of equity in their house, sometimes they can't really access it using traditional lending sources. So one thing that we have thought about doing as an organization is creating this community revolving loan fund where we ourselves will loan money to homeowners in East Palo Alto with favorable terms in order to be able to create these ADUs. And so what we envision and we hope to accomplish is being able to provide 1 to 3 year loans with the option to roll over into a 5 to 25-year loan, and where the homeowners can possibly recoup their development costs through the rental income and be able to pay off that loan. Of course, with agreeing to a deed restriction for the unit to house a low income household as well, while the loan is active. And so we've tried to pilot this type of loan product with a different also loan product or a different type of mechanism, I should say. Next slide. And that is what we call the backyard lease model. This is actually very common. I think other ADU builders or practitioners are also exploring. And this is where homeowners that absolutely cannot access financing because of maybe they're seniors, maybe they just don't have the qualifications to qualify for financing, could really use or take advantage of this, is where an organization like EPA can do leases a portion of their backyard to build an ADU, and then we share or we split costs, or I'm sorry, we split the income that is generated through this ADU. So for example, as I mentioned, we build an ADU on the homeowner's property, and then we split the rent of the ADU between the homeowner and the organization until the development cost is recouped. And then at the end of that term, the homeowner gets the ADU to themselves, and we leave. And what we have accomplished in those 15 years is build an affordable unit for a low-income household, help the homeowner increase the value of their home, build some equity themselves, and also generate rental income. And what we do with that funding that we received is we revolve it back into a different project. So the money keeps revolving itself within the community through the production of ADUs and achieving affordable housing, and also supporting homeowners through their economical journeys, through being to sustain themselves for the years to come. And we actually have piloted this type of model, and we were successful in doing it in one of our nearby communities here in this area, Mellow Park in the Bellhaven community. Next slide. So this is an example of that project that we just completed about a year ago now. We completed it. And so this is one of those projects where we leased the backyard of the homeowner, built this ADU. We house a low income household there right now, and we split the rent with the homeowner. And it is a 15-year term. And at the end of the 15 years, the homeowner will keep the ADU for themselves. And then we use the money that we recouped from there to put it into a different project. Of course, all these products or loan products that I'm referring to right now are still very much in their piloting phases. We've learned a lot from them, and we wish to be able to continue a lot more of them. Of course, we always need that funding to continue doing this work. But when we talk about helping low-income households or reducing those barriers to ADU production, this is what we're talking about in terms of having something that's favorable and that's going to work for our homeowners, and that cannot actually access traditional financing sources or see a lot of barriers like the ones that I mentioned earlier on, in terms of debt to income ratios, income itself, not being able to access equity. And so this is just one of the ways that we see of helping our homeowners overcome those barriers. Next slide. And so another thing that we're doing as well is with the city of East Palo Alto, we actually did is apply to HCD for some CAL home funding back in about 2019, 2020, and we were awarded a CAL home loan to be able to provide East Palo Alto households gap loans for their projects. So any homeowner that would use this funding to build ADUs would then rent or pretty much de-restrict the unit to be able to rent it out to a low-income household. And then afterwards, it's a deferred gap loan, in which the homeowners do not have to do monthly payments on the loan itself, and the loan will come out at the sale of the home, so a couple years down the line. But as long as the loan is on their home, the homeowner does have to rent it out to a low-income household. Next slide, please. So we launched that program back in about early 2022, and we have seen some barriers to the program. A lot of the barriers that I've mentioned already before, but some barriers that were actually barriers that we as a city, as a community, were placing on our homeowners. So the majority of the homeowners that did qualify for this loan or were income qualified for the loan actually were code enforcement cases. As I mentioned, we have our beginnings are in addressing the needs of homeowners with unpermitted second units. And what we found actually was that there's actually no legalization process or amnesty program here in the city. So a lot of the homeowners that we were working with to income qualify them for this loan actually were stuck at the planning phases of their project because their projects did not conform to their development code. So that was one of the barriers that we saw early on when we launched our program. Again, there were other barriers as our homeowners some of our homeowners had limited financial capacity. Again, working with homeowners who they don't always document their rental income or just their job income. Homeowners who were sharing their debt or liabilities with other, again, something that is very common in communities that are trying just to live. And then, of course, we did see and experience the rising costs an inflation when it came around ADU development, where all the phases of project development were affected, and as well as the barrier or little bottleneck when it comes to it being a household decision, and households not always being able to weigh the pros and cons, or if they do, they sometimes are not able to come to a decision of whether they do want to embark on this journey of building an ADU or fixing an ADU if they have a code enforcement case. So early on, we saw that there were a lot of barriers. We saw that there were a lot of bottlenecks. And as other research has shown, there is a lot of bottlenecks and barriers. So what is it that we can do? And so what we try to do is try to focus on the things that we can do as a city, as a community, and as an organization to try and help our homeowners. Next slide, please. So what we have tried to do is, particularly with our Cal Home guidelines, because that is actually something that we administer for the city, is we're trying to, right now we're in the process of updating our loan guidelines in a way that would eliminate some of these barriers. So what we're doing right now is we're actually trying to increase the loan amount for all ADU projects, so that our homeowners can take advantage of the full amount that we are actually allowed to give out. So for example, just as an example, our maximum loan amount that we were able to give out to homeowners was $80,000. Actually, the guidelines allow us to do 100. So what we've done is give increase our loan amount to $100,000, so that homeowners can actually be able to access more than 80 as costs have significantly increased. We have also removed the debt to income ratio requirement out of our loan guidelines. Again, this was something that was becoming a barrier where our homeowners were not able to qualify for loans by themselves, because we were taking into consideration their ability to repay monthly on a loan that did not require them to make monthly payments. And as a city, as a community, what we're doing is we are advocating for code amendments that would happen later on this summer, where we will reduce setback requirements for projects. For example, code enforcement cases or projects that violated setbacks. So we're trying to relax some of that. We are also looking into streamlining the ADU process in the city. The city is also looking at doing some pre-approved ADU model plans that will be available for homeowners. And we're also thinking of waiving or reducing fees, such as those permanent processing fees, as well as development impact fees. Again, all things that as a city, as a community, as an organization, we think that we can advocate for and be able to achieve in terms of really assisting our East Palo Alto households. Next slide, please. And so I just wanted to end my presentation with just saying, like, what can your jurisdiction do, or your community or organization do? You can always advocate for streamlining of internal ADU permitting. I think it was mentioned before in the previous presenter that in doing streamlining is very helpful for our homeowners in order to get projects going. We can also expedite policies that lower the barriers, again, controlling our controllables, obviously advocating for regional and state policies and programs. And finally, my personal favorite, and I think that's something that we can acknowledge, is to empower our community-based organizations to lead outreach and individualized support. So having more programs like EPA Can Do ADU program, having things like the San Jose Ally program, programs that or solutions where you can really leverage your community-based organizations, their knowledge, their presence, and their reach as well to help continue to do this work. I think that's something that we have worked with the city of East Palo Alto really closely with for the last, I want to say, since we started as an organization, to really push through these solutions to really address the needs of our community. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Ileana. That's amazing. Just the amount of innovation that's happening there at EPA Can Do, I think really speaks to the need for place-based community developers and place-based organizations that really know the community and the community's needs and the city and can kind of help bridge that gap. Yes, please do drop questions in the chat. I have some questions that I would love to ask. So given that importance that we can see of having a support system to help navigate as well as doing the small scale buildings. And Mohammed, you've talked about how San Diego's ADU bonus program is also being leveraged there to preserve existing affordable housing. And that's something that we don't have an organization like EPA Can Do in the South Bay. We're really working hard to grow and develop small community-based developers that are prepared to take on smaller preservation projects that aren't a huge apartment complex. And the ways, a lot of places here, we have older duplexes and fourplexes that are at risk of being torn down or renovated and then re-rented for prices outside what's affordable for their current residents. So Mohammed, can you tell me a little more about how the ADU bonus program in San Diego is working to help maybe build capacity in communities for small scale affordable preservation, for potentially community development corporations, for BIPOC and women developers? Is this an opportunity that we need to focus more energy on here in the South Bay?
Yes, definitely. Through my interviews with planning staff and builders and community members, the way that the ADU bonus program is being leveraged is that whether it was a vacant housing unit or a unit that's much older, which is pretty normal in the existing housing stock of California, that this has been a tool to be used to preserve housing. So if a housing is being rented and it's like pretty like broken down and it's very costly to renovate it, and then when they renovate it, they're going to raise the rent a lot more to recoup the cost. This has been seen as a model that you could finance the renovation and also the construction of these ADU units. And these ADU units have to be affordable to low to moderate income people, at least half of them. It changes the dynamic from it being like one unit to maybe 3 or 4 that's affordable to the family that's already living there, and allows other people to live into these homes. And at the same time, it preserves the housing stock that's there. I really think that this model is this innovation through a density bonus for accessory dwelling units, how it's been used to preserve existing housing and also increase capacity of housing, should be replicated by other localities. I know the city of Berkeley has been looking into this. The city of Oakland has been looking into this. HCD is looking to utilize this example as like a best practice, and other localities are looking at this research paper and are seeing the success. When the issue with development right now is that we're either renovating or adding an ADU or building 50 to 100 plus units. And there isn't this like middle of which these ADU developers can expand into building more and maybe become more successful later, right? Like to learn these skills. The Great Recession knocks out a lot of developers within California, and that hasn't really recouped. And this program, which is finding people that are housing adjacent, typically, to go and buy land and build on it and being able to afford and finance that. And there are people of color and women who are just not represented in the building field. It builds wealth in 2 ways. It allows us to build on existing lots for existing homeowners. I believe Barrio Logan just recently completed development built by a BIPOC developer. There's some market rate, some affordable housing through the ADU bonus program in a very walkable, historically Hispanic community or Latinx community. I was just in DC, so you have to say Hispanic in DC, but then you come here, you have to say Latin. Anyway, so that's the whole thing. So yeah, like this has been seen. It will take years to really measure how effective it's been. to increase diversity in the builder space, right? These are just beginning interviews, beginning illustrations of the program. But what we're seeing right now is mostly a success through an experimentation in housing policy that hasn't been done in the rest of the country.
Awesome, thank you. It seems like that would also really kind of lower the barriers for community land trusts, for local community-based developers like EPA can do to be able to get started in the space. Ileana, you've told me a little bit about EPA Can Do's partnership with the City of East Palo Alto, especially around that legalizing unpermitted ADUs. We know that can be a really important source of housing stock in lower income communities. We also know from our work that this can have some unintended consequences that you mentioned. Once those issues are sunlighted, once there's been the code enforcement visit, there's risks that we could lose that housing stock. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how your strategy here in the South Bay. We've had a few cities that had ADU amnesty programs. They at least began as kind of temporary, as a limited period of time that folks could bring their ADUs, unpermitted ADUs, into compliance. But I'd love to hear a little more about how your strategy is different from a traditional ADU amnesty program.
Thank you. Yes, so here EPA Can Do has a long working relationship with the City of East Palo Alto. We've always partnered with them for program administration, as well as really advocated for changes and implementing policies around housing, right? And so with our ADU, through our ADU work, and really moving forward the work that was started a lot with our second unit task force. Although we've done a lot of work around unpermitted units and second units, it always seemed that we always knew that unpermitted units were something that needed to be addressed through an actual policy or a program. And it's a little unfortunate that it has taken us this long, since 2016, to be able to really come out with a program or a policy or solution to that. But I think we're at a good time right now to really hone in on that. And so what we have done as an organization, speaking with our city partners, is thinking about what kind of change will make a long-term change in terms of really supporting our homeowners. And so city staff themselves are the ones who actually proposed, like, we're not going to do an amnesty program, or we should probably look into an amnesty program like Band-Aid solutions or something that's temporary. We should do something that's going to be long lasting. And maybe that could look like actually amending our development code, which is much more of a permanent thing, and is not necessarily on a case-by-case basis. So that's something that we are looking into embarking on in the next couple months, along with our city staff. Me as the boots on the ground, working with homeowners, and also encourage them to advocate for these changes.
That's awesome. Thank you. And can you talk a little bit more about kind of your relationship with the city? It sounds like it is sometimes pulling together and partnership, and sometimes some pushing as well. So kind of navigating those different roles you've played as an organization, sometimes through partnership and technical advice, and sometimes in an advocacy or an accountability role. Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of that. The cities are usually limited by what they can do, right? And us as community-based organizations, we're driven by change. We're driven by creating a just city, right? And sometimes, some of those things can sort of be at odds with each other. And so one of the things is really looking at, like, what are we doing this work for, right? The city is doing this to improve the quality of life of its residents, in order to promote housing, in order to serve its residents. And us as community-based organizations, we want to see that come through. We want to see that be achieved. And I think a lot of that work comes from
You know, we both have roots. The city incorporated almost 40 years ago. We are approaching our 40th anniversary. EPA Can Do is about 35 years old now. So we all started around the same time, and all with all with being rooted in community self-determination, community legacy. And I think that's what really helps us be on the sort of same boat in terms of thought process, in order to see the community really serve its community. So I would say that it really comes from just grounded principles. But I do encourage other jurisdictions to really sort out community organizations that can really help them move the work forward, because although we are there to advocate for our communities and sometimes be there to make our cities be accountable to our communities, it's all for the same, it's all in the spirit of the same work, and then that is being able to support the communities that we are located in.
That's awesome. Thank you. Mohammed, we have an audience question. Have we seen any progress on the appraisal process since you published your work? Are there any safe assumptions about increased property values from building ADUs? This question comes from someone who does ADU development in communities of color and doesn't want to mislead homeowners when the appraisal process seems to be kind of in flux.
Yeah, definitely. So the appraisal process is, well, I don't understand 100%, because housing space is huge and there's so much in it. And I just kind of take what people tell me and I respond and share it with the world, right? People that are too busy to do the researcher's role, right? But what I understand of what's going on with the appraisal process is that when more homes are being built, and that incomes can be tracked with those homes being built in specific areas, then that makes it easier for appraisers to appraise the homes to their actual value. And taking into consideration these changes of which income generation happens from accessory dwelling unit, I think if the homeowner is selling in like a few years, it wouldn't be necessarily helpful. But if they have a much longer timeline, maybe it'd be better for them for the appraisal process. I'd also like to ask Ileana if she has any thoughts, because she's on the front lines.
No, definitely. I think appraisal is something that is also, it has to come up for some of my homeowners lately. What I tried, I think a part of it is also finding friendly lenders that can actually work around these parameters. I do know of a couple homeowners who have been successful in using their projected rental income in terms to help them get loans as well. East Palo Alto we hit the $1 million club like a few years ago, so there's a lot of equity in our houses. A lot of our housing stock is old, so we have also a legacy homeowners that have been here for a very long time, and so usually appraisals has been something that has been a barrier, but it's something that I think that, at least from my experience, lenders or appraisals are actually being a little bit more ADU friendly. At least I would say that would be the experience that I've had here in East Palo Alto.
And isn't it, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't it typically like smaller, more community banks and regional banks that are more friendly versus like the big banks like Chase or something like that?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah, so here in East Palo Alto, we have our credit unions, our San Mateo Credit Union as well, who also has ADU loan products that are available to our residents.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess it's both. Just more ADUs being built. We understand how much they're valued and the values change, and working with local lenders, like with every small development, working with the local lenders just much better and easier. The appraisals can change, but I wouldn't. Would you agree with my recommendation? Like 3 years is a little like too early. Like if you plan to sell in 3 years, maybe that's not the best time. But if you plan to sell in like 10 years, then maybe the appraisal process will be fixed. Okay.
Awesome. This is such an awesome opportunity to learn from from what's happening in other parts of the Bay Area too. We really appreciate both of you focusing so much on concrete solutions and what is working and what's having results and where those barriers are. EPA Can Do is clearly already at the center of finding those housing solutions and navigating those processes. We do have some audience questions about whether you work outside of East Palo Alto. If there are similar programs available in San Jose. I think I may know the answer to that, but I'll go ahead and put that to you.
I think you may know that better than I, Allison, but East Palo EPA Can Do, one of the things that we pride ourselves is be rooted in our community. So we do work primarily with our East Palo Alto community. I can't promise scale anytime soon. I wish I could duplicate myself and clone myself in our organization and our program, but maybe in a couple of years with AI we can. But I would defer to you, Allison, for similar programs down in the South Bay.
I wish we could clone you too, because one of the things that we know is really important that has really grown in East Palo Alto and in parts of the East Bay as well are those place-based community development corporations that like you really know your community, know the barriers, have established those connections with the city. So I think there's a real opportunity for those of us who are in the advocacy space to learn from what you're doing and also kind of create spaces where we're helping folks begin to navigate that. I think that's a really important opportunity that the San Diego ADU bonus program offers as a place with the bar to be lower, where community development corporations, we have strong place-based advocacy organizations in parts of the South Bay that have not taken that step into development. Maybe it's not right for them, but they could serve as partners for place-based developers that are beginning to move that direction. So kind of incubating those new organizations is something that SV at Home is placed a lot of importance on, something that we're really looking to do, and to continue to learn from you in other parts of the Bay Area that are ahead of us in those strategies. One last shot. Do we have any other audience questions before we move on to kind of wrapping things up? I think we are ready to move on a little bit. Mohammed and Ileana, I appreciate so much you being here. It's been such a rich conversation and kind of marrying together the statewide research and understanding what the environment is and the very local, very place-based innovations and partnerships and seeing what's really working, understanding those barriers and some steps that can be taken that we as advocates or we in some cases as city staff can work to implement to overcome those barriers and help expand access to ADUs to communities of color where ADUs can have some of the most impact. So very exciting conversation today. I really appreciate you being here with us. Corey, if you could share slides again, kind of in a similar vein, a lot of you probably already know that we have something exciting coming up that could help provide funding for some of the preservation work that has been a part of this as well. So SV at Home is a member of Bay Area Housing for All, which is a coalition of organizations committed to affordable housing and ending homelessness. We will have 2 game-changing affordable housing measures that we're targeting for the November 2024 ballot, including a statewide constitutional amendment and a $10 to $20 billion Bay Area regional housing bond. The state measure would reduce the voter threshold to pass local affordable housing bonds to line up with other bond rules and allow more flexibility to fund tools like rental assistance and homelessness prevention services and permanent supportive housing. The $10 billion regional bond would produce and preserve 45,000 affordable homes. So housing 500,000 low-income households over the lifetime of these developments. Both measures are needed together to make an impactful change in the region and beyond. And we're going to provide a link in the chat. As Emily, if you could drop that in, please take a look and learn more. Get ready to endorse the effort, or go ahead and endorse that. And it's time to kind of start talking with neighbors and colleagues about what's coming up.